Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti initiates a wider discussion of the value of fraternity and social friendship in the modern world. The first chapter is an extended reading of the signs of the times, providing a broader context upon which the appeal to friendship and solidarity becomes imperative. It lists various aspects that Pope Francis deems problematic, both at the interpersonal and institutional levels of contemporary life. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis invokes his memorable encounter with Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayeh of Egypt in 2017. He speaks of his shared conviction with the Grand Imam of the moral deterioration that pervades the modern world. The shared reflection of Pope Francis and the Grand Imam is an attempt to forge a common witness at the margins. Its prospects for grounding an alternative reading of the current state of affairs cannot be ignored. In the pages of Fratelli Tutti, the Pontiff criticized global indifference. Pope Francis expressed particular concern over disconnection with one's roots and the feelings of alienation and isolation it brings, especially to young people. The main issue is not the lack of resources or the inability to achieve progress, but the unevenness of progress because of systemic exclusion of certain sectors from participation in decision-making. The inconsistency in cultural and economic globalization is this, that it is inclusion without inclusivity. In the liberal capitalist order, poorer nations of the global south have less leverage against the influential countries of the global north. The inclusion of several Asian countries in the global chain of production places them at marginal positions relative to their counterparts in Europe and North America. Several Asian countries like the Philippines, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Thailand, among others, have historically been exporters of skilled and semi-skilled labor for richer countries. While this outbound migration has brought in much-needed revenues to keep the country economically afloat, it often comes with a high social cost, as left-behind children pay the price of distant and absentee parenting, among other difficulties. The Pontiff remarks that calls to open up to the world surprisingly result to oppressive arrangements that further marginalize already marginalized nations. The COVID-19 pandemic is one of the highlights of the encyclical's first chapter. The pandemic erupted as Fratelli Tutti was in the process of being written, and the pandemic raged throughout the world. The Pontiff saw an occasion to encourage greater awareness of the need for interdependence. Despite the many problems that the pandemic brought us, the Pontiff tends to see its potential in changing the world's trajectory from extreme forms of individualism and marginalization of the poor towards societies that are hinged on inclusivity, co-responsibility, and sharing. Countries like the Philippines have shown difficulty in containing the spread of the virus, owing to several domestic factors. There's ample evidence to say that Philippine policy pertaining to COVID-19 adopted a security rather than public health approach. While the lockdowns have shown success in momentarily slowing down the spread of COVID-19, related rules and regulations were deployed by security forces to discipline a perceived unruly and non-compliant population. There were also several instances when lockdown regulations were applied to civilians to quell dissent and silence mounting criticism of government inadequacies in dealing with the social problems caused by the pandemic. Pope Francis believes that the current pandemic has the potential to provoke a rethinking of humanity's goals and the motivations animating these goals. The situation on the ground, however, is much more diverse and uneven. In the early phase of the pandemic, the only coordinated response was the reduction of mobility and social distancing policies. Other than this, responses to the COVID-19 pandemic varied from country to country, depending on the domestic political situation, availability of resources, and level of coordinated response to the social problems brought about by the pandemic. One of the fresh perspectives offered by the encyclical is in reference to social media. His observations occasion a closer look at virtual space as a platform to build enduring ties. The picture depicted in the encyclical is not too promising. It warns of the superficiality of online relationships and real instances of social aggression and verbal violence directed against opponents. The pontiff remarked that the frenzy of texting, while fostering a sense of connection with others, cannot be a replacement for careful listening to the other and contemplative silence. At the end of the first chapter, Pope Francis calls on everyone to a renewed hope. He views hope as deeply rooted in the human heart and also independent of our circumstances and historical conditioning. A social hope, aspirations to authentic Christian life in today's world are crafted within the rough grounds. This involves critique of existing social structures that inhibit human flourishing and conscientious action to change these structures. By pointing out the dark clouds that hover over the world's poor, imagining an alternative inclusive world becomes not only possible, but more so necessary than ever.